There was a recent seminar that I invited Lucille Greef, a South African coach who designed the IEQ9 test and the Euphoria test. She was one of my first teachers, absolutely brilliant woman, also like a very shamanic healer. Although she would never allow me to say that, and overlay that nonsense on her. But that when we use the Enneagram in our practices, how do we not become experts about someone's psyche or make any assumptions about who they are, or their background, or their life, or the structure of their internal whatevers. We imagine a lot of stuff as Enneagram practitioners, and because the tool's so powerful, it's easy for us to latch onto it as an ego support. The same way as, if we're a Sangoma or a yoga teacher or whatever, we can kind of get into our image of ourselves as a form of feeling secure, as a helping professional. And hopefully part of this program, being able to walk away with new ways of working with the Enneagram, or if you're only starting to work with it, to make sure that you don't impose it as a colonizing discourse on people's psyches, and to use it in a way that is about pattern recognition for yourself, to know what might be fruitful with the clients. In NAM, they talk about a working hypothesis. So, for example, if I'm working with an Enneagram 2, the Enneagram tells us the working hypothesis with an Enneagram 2 is that they're suffering from the severed heart. They're suffering from a terrible deficit of unconditional love in childhood and a shaming of their needs. And that more than likely someone else's needs were the epicenter of the household, and they had to revolve around that and be concerned with those needs. So I've worked with a lot of Enneagram 2s, and I probably mentioned before, having a narcissistic parent, an alcoholic parent, or a very depressed parent. So somebody where the parents' needs were the most important. So I worked with someone recently whose mother was very, very depressed, kind of never recovered from postnatal depression after the birth of the next child, who was born very soon after my client. And so, my client's needs being completely displaced very, very young, like, a year old. And then this depressed mother, and the father saying, mommy's depressed, just leave her, just let her rest, that none of her emotional needs had any place in that early environment. And the only way for that child to cope was to repress those needs, dismiss them. And that had to happen unconsciously. All our defense mechanisms are so unconscious. So, having worked with so many twos with a similar pattern, and having read the theory and reading the childhood patterns in the wisdom of the Enneagram, and Russ's teaching about the heart wounds, etc., the lost childhood messages, the Enneagram gives you a wealth of background in order to form a kind of working hypothesis that you won't talk about it to the client, because that would be intrusive or inappropriate, really, and a bit rude from Tom Condon's perspective to tell them anything about two, like you're a two, therefore. It's just appreciating that a lot of where they're coming from, if they are correctly typed, is going to be those kinds of dynamics, those kinds of particular deficits. And the more you work with the Enneagram, the more you'll notice how accurate it is about this stuff, that the hypotheses are laser beam precision. I'd say, I can't say less than 100% of the time, that if someone's correctly typed, you have an empathic and like physical appreciation of what their ego is trying to do, what their ego is trying to make them feel better about, the things that it's reaching out for that weren't there for that person when they were little. So once we start appreciating that inner logic of type, it becomes much, much easier to be with somebody's wounding as the core of our kind of relational offering, is that I'm here to create space for you to work with that pain, and not in a way that I'm taking them there, not in the way that I'm taking them to talk about their childhood trauma, but it informs the quality of presence that I offer and the way in which I validate and the kinds of questions I ask. So that's really what I'm hoping this course will help you to do, is have better working hypotheses, better background understanding. And Tom Condon speaks about knowing where to fish. So when clients are talking, to not just be getting drawn into their story about themselves or believing what they say about themselves or kind of adopting their perspective unconsciously on their situation, but being able to recognize the pattern and to see what their ego is trying to do in their life, as well as how they are trying to train you as a therapist. Because every ego pattern is also a training program for everybody in the world. So, for example, the 7 ego strategy is, let me convince you that I'm fun and entertaining and that we're going to have a good time together and that, you know, life is good and we shouldn't think about pain and suffering. So my whole training program is designed to lift the whole vibe and to make sure that I don't deal with pain by not letting anybody's pain into the room. Or, you know, so just appreciating that the client is also going to be training you in their program. And when we know what that program is trying to do, we don't get drawn into it and we don't collude with the client's ego strategy. We won't challenge it necessarily because that's what they need. But gradually, us not buying into it in terms of playing along, offering an alternative is healing in itself, you know, or meeting that training program, the interface that the client offers us in a way that they start realizing, oh, I don't have to do this, and it's safe to do something else. So it's a delicate art. You know, in the 7 example, you know, I have these 7 clients. They don't really like working with me. I don't have a lot of them, but they arrive and they're incredibly hyped, a bit hypomanic and raving about whatever and not present at all. And then, you know, that invitation to, you know, what's it like for you when you settle and take a few deep breaths, or let's just become present so that we can have the session, you know, connect with the soles of your feet. You can see there's like a shock that happens if you invite a 7 into the present moment. They actually have a kind of existential shock because being in the present moment was intolerable for them in childhood and it's too much. So you've almost got to titrate it because, you know, if someone doesn't want to be here, then go easy on making them not do what they want to do. You know, sometimes play along a little bit, sometimes, you know, be okay with the discomfort of someone else doing their ego at the same time as making it easier for them not to. In the Enneagram 2 example, it's, if you know that the client has got this heart wound of the severed heart, like this absolute invalidation of their feelings, to really validate and connect with them, to care about their actual inner life, their inner experience, what's happening for them in their chest. And when they talk, they'll want to talk about their partners, their relationships, the people that they're having difficulties with relationally, and to be able to say, so what are your feelings about this? What are your needs? What does it feel like for you, when you get so angry at being unappreciated, and validating the rage that of that line to 8, that feeling of just, worthlessness, insignificance, exclusion, being able to really validate and appreciate how difficult it is to feel a sense of lovelessness and the desperation to create love. That's what 2s had to do when they were little. They had to create love. There wasn't love. They had to make it up for themselves. Like either by being very loving towards a sibling or loving towards the depressed caregiver. Like, what does it feel like to have to exert that much effort to kind of manufacture the love in your life? And when we arrive for clients with that kind of appreciation of the inner life of their type, and the needs, and the reason for the reality strategy, it creates ease for the client, because there's no shaming of that strategy. There's zero shaming. It's, well, obviously, that was a really good idea when you were little. That's the best possible thing you could have done. And yes, it's the best possible thing that got you to where you are now, but sometimes we overdo it. And you've probably noticed the cost of overdoing your training program, of everyone being able to rely on you. So, yeah, just grabbing the opportunity of what Mary was saying there, to go into some of the understanding of what the Enneagram and trauma is about. So I want to stop and let anyone ask questions. I want to do a bit more of a formal intro.